If the Orioles are going to be sellers at this year's deadline, the next question becomes what type of players should they target to get back in those trades? We'll try to break that down coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, July 17th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at what kind of players the Orioles should be targeting if they are sellers and trade away some of their major league pieces at this year's deadline. We'll discuss how it should probably be more pitching, and specifically how major league ready that pitching should be, and name a few names across baseball that the Orioles should certainly be targeting among those teams that will be buyers and will come asking about some of these Orioles players. And then we'll talk a little bit about Elvin Rodriguez, who the Orioles claimed off waivers from the Brewers on Wednesday. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So we've talked a lot about on this show, will the Orioles be buyers? Will they hold? Will they be sellers? We have gotten to the point where they are 9 games under 500 here at the All-Star break. There are 6 teams between them and the final wildcard spot in the American League. We're more than halfway through the season. They're not going for the full teardown, but at some point we have to accept this team is going to trade away, especially the rentals, from some of its major league talent. You have to kind of turn the attention to what should they try to get back? Because if you are the Orioles, obviously, you're looking for major league type talent back because you're trying to win again in 2026. But that's not always going to be there immediately, especially when you're trading away rentals. Their value is just a little lower because they're guys another team's only going to get for 2 months before they become free agents. So what kind of players should the Orioles be targeting? I really have 2 groups of kind of players in mind. And they're both pitchers, which is unsurprising. But let's start with that first group of players. I think it should be starting pitching who has at least made it to the AA level and preferably at least started the 2025 season at the AA level. Guys who could theoretically start a big league game at some point in 2026 because this team should be trying to win next year. Now, the Orioles have pitching depth in AA right now. They have the likes of Braxton Bragg and Trey Gibson and Levi Wells and Nestor Herman and this group of guys they drafted a couple of years ago who are really coming along development-wise. But the only one even close to that group who's gotten to AAA at this point is Cameron Weston, and he hasn't shown this year that he's ready to pitch in the big leagues. Maybe that will come in 2026. This team is going to need rotation help next year, and that help should come through free agency, hopefully in trades for established big leaguers this offseason, but they also need to create a pool of good depth that they can turn to and hope that one of those guys blossoms into a young starting pitcher who's definitely going to be in your top 5. And they tried to create that for this year, and so many injuries wiped that away incredibly quickly here in the 2025 season. So who could some of those pitchers be on some buying teams that the Orioles could potentially go after? Because right now, you've got Cameron Weston, Brandon Young, Chase McDermott kind of as your AAA depth, although Young's in the majors right now, and McDermott left his last start with elbow pain. We're certainly monitoring that. Weston hasn't pitched well enough to be ready for the big leagues this year. If the O's can get controllable starting pitchers that have either already debuted or, are in AAA and are very close to being able to do that, they should absolutely try and get that. But usually those players who are starters who maybe haven't established themselves but have gotten to the big leagues or are very close to the big leagues and seem like they're ready to go, those come in the biggest deals. And the Orioles don't have the kind of controllable players that they want to trade that's going to be able to get you back those guys who have debuted or are right in AAA and are the very tippy-top pitching prospects. I don't think they have anything to trade away that they're willing to trade away this year that's going to get the players like that. So instead, you got to go for the guys who are maybe a little further away or maybe they are in AAA, but they haven't put it all together quite yet. Those are the kind of players you should be looking for. Now, I've put together some options. This does not at all mean that the Orioles are going to be able to go and get these guys, but it's possible. Like, these are some players who would at least make some sense for the Orioles. So let's start with an old friend. That is Tobias Myers. I think this is a guy who could fit fairly perfectly in what the Orioles are potentially looking for, because Tobias Myers was a guy who was in the big leagues last year. Remember, former Orioles draft pick. He was traded around to multiple teams. He landed with the Brewers as a 26-year-old right-handed pitcher and had an absolutely breakout season last year. He'd been kind of middling in AAA for a little bit, finally got a big league chance, and he had a 3.00 ERA in 25 starts for the Brewers last year. He was fantastic. Began this year in the Brewers rotation, had a 4.95 ERA in his first 5 starts, wasn't nearly as good. The Brewers got healthy, and they optioned Myers down to AAA, and he has mostly been there since. So, you worry a little bit, was last year just a flash in the pan? But he's not a free agent until after 2030. He still has another major league option year after this one, which certainly helps you. And in AAA, like, he's been throwing the ball well. He's made 11 starts and has a 2.93 ERA. He's come back up and pitched one more game in the big leagues, or at least been on the roster for a little bit. But generally, he's throwing the ball well in AAA. His stuff looks to be fairly similar. And he's not going to be your ace, but he's a guy who should cost less, should be a return that would make sense for a rental reliever, one of the outfielders the Orioles have if they do want to trade with Milwaukee, who, they're trying to win an NL Central, get back to the postseason this year. They should be some version of buyers at the deadline. And I think Tobias Myers is just a guy who could come in, he could have options, he could, be your 4 or 5 starter, he'd go up and down, he could pitch out of the bullpen. These are the kind of guys they should be looking for. Now, looking at the Mets, right? They have a ton of arms that are in this category, and they could use bullpen help. They could use outfield help that the Orioles have. Brandon Sproat, Jonah Tong, Nolan McLean are their top 3 pitching prospects right now. Not sure the Orioles have someone who could bring those back. I really hope they could, but those are 3 guys in Double and AAA who have just been outstanding. Maybe Jonah Tong, because he's still down in AA, so he's kind of further away for the Mets. He's got a huge strikeout rate, so maybe he's more possible. But I'm looking more at someone like Dom Hamill, right? This is the more so the kind of player that I am looking at. Hamill is already 26 years old. He is currently in his second AAA season with the Mets, and he's been working, somewhat as a starter, somewhat as a reliever. He's got a 4.66 ERA, good strikeout to walk rates. He's thrown about 48 innings in AAA this season, and I feel like this is more of the player that they could go after. Now, he struggled a little bit in AAA recently. Maybe that makes the Mets more likely to deal him, but it's a guy with, the lowest walk rate of his career. He's got a really, hoppy, good ride fastball. He's got 3 different breaking balls he throws. He's got all the traits the Orioles would look for, and it's a guy who's in his second year in AAA. And I think you could feel confident he'd be ready to pitch in the big leagues next season in 2026 when the Orioles are looking to go at this again and be helpful to either your rotation or your bullpen. How about the Chicago Cubs? They desperately need bullpen help. They've got a couple guys the Orioles could go and get. Brandon Birdsell is a guy who I'm pretty interested in. Now, he is coming back from a shoulder injury, which makes you worry. He's a 25-year-old right-handed pitcher. It was a 5th-round pick for the Cubs back in 2022. 45 future value guy, but also coming back from the injury, he has started pitching on rehab. He's made 2 starts in the complex, now 2 starts in high A on his rehab assignment as he kind of makes himself back to AAA. He made 12 starts in AAA at the end of last year, so he's trying to get himself back to AAA. And honestly, he was great in AAA last season. I mean, he came up there and 24 years old, and he posted a 26% strikeout rate and a 7% walk rate. I mean, he had a 3.15 FIP. He was a guy who looked like he was pretty close to being big league ready. So if he is healthy, and now, he pitched 5 innings in his last start in high A, he might be moved up to AA for his next rehab, maybe. Like, this is a guy who's getting healthier. Maybe the Mets are more willing to deal him, or the Cubs are more willing to deal him because he's coming off the injury, and because that's a Cubs team looks like it could win the World Series this year. And they already went out and got Kyle Tucker, and there's no guarantee they'll re-sign him in the offseason. They got to kind of go for it this year. And maybe that's a pitcher they are willing to move on from. Will Sanders is another guy in the Cubs organization that I've taken a look at. He's a little bit younger, which you could say is helpful or maybe not because he's maybe further from the bigs, but he has got promoted to AAA this year. Will Sanders is a 23-year-old right-hander, fourth-round pick from a couple of years ago. He's seen as less of a prospect, but he's also been pitching pretty well. His numbers in AA were better than he's been in the 6 starts in AAA since being promoted, but he is still a starter. He's had some really good strikeout rates, fairly low walk rates coming through the minor leagues, like someone who the Orioles could say, hey, he could be a big league pitcher for us in 2026. And these are the guys they could go after. San Diego Padres, right? They could always use a bullpen arm, maybe a bat like a Ryan O'Hearn or an outfielder. They've got an intriguing arm in Henry Baez. He is a 22-year-old right-handed pitcher who has been in AA for most of this season, actually for all of this season, and he's got a 2.08 ERA in 18 AA starts for the Padres this year. Solid strikeout rate, low walk rate. Like, he's a guy who's completely knocking on the door of AAA. He was added to their 40-man roster this offseason. He's a guy who you could project to be in the big leagues at some point next season, who's got some really good stuff. Fastball, curveball, splitter kind of guy, and then the command's not too bad at all. He's got some electric stuff. Like, these are the guys you could be going after. How about the Astros, right? They've already been connected to maybe being interested in Cedric Mullins. They could certainly use another bullpen arm as they go potentially on another playoff run. Orioles match up there. They got a couple of guys in AJ Blueball and Ryan Gusto, a couple of right-handers who have already started games in the big leagues for the Astros this year, but haven't quite cemented themselves as regular parts of the rotation. They've either gone up and down between AAA or they've moved to the bullpen. They've gotten chances, but they're going to be pushed out soon because the Astros are going to add a starter. They're probably going to get healthier. Those are expendable type pitchers. I would say Blueball and Gusto are like the Norby and Stowers of the Orioles, where it's like, yeah, these are major league bats, but we don't really have any space to play these guys right now. Let's move them to get something we could use. So maybe they would move a Ryan Gusto to get a Mullins Dominguez package or something and improve their team. And then the Orioles could get a guy in Ryan Gusto who not only has good numbers in the minor leagues, but has already debuted. He's pitched 74 and 2/3 innings for the Astros this year. It's a 4.58 ERA, 4.09 FIP, good strikeout to walk. He's shown at least some solid stuff numbers, some good pitchability. He's worked out of the bullpen. He's worked as a starter, and you get a guy who has a really good fastball, a fantastic slider. It's a good sinker, good mix that he has, good stuff numbers. You get him right in that rotation and just say go for the rest of this year to work as a starter and get him ready for next year. Like, these are the guys starting pitcher-wise because, of course you want the Mick Abels of the world, top kind of pitching prospect for the Phillies who's started a couple of games this year and has looked great. But there's going to be such a price on a guy like that you just have to take one step down and you get to the Ryan Gustos and these other interesting arms that I think the Orioles should be targeting. But starters are definitely a cost to get them as prospects because it's always hard to find starting pitching prospects because they're always getting injured. Sometimes it's a little easier to get a reliever, and whether it's a guy who you could turn into a starter or just someone who could help your bullpen moving forward, because this Orioles bullpen, it's going to look different next year. We'll talk about some of those kind of arms, right? The finding the next Yennier Cano. We'll try to parse that out coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music, it should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices, they actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Are you tired of just endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, maybe once it's on that secondary market? Well, Game Time Zone Deals, they pick the best seats in your section for you. And with Game Time, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So obviously the Orioles are definitely going to be looking for some starting pitching depth in these trades going into next season, but it's a little bit easier to acquire relief types. They just don't cost as much because starters are more valuable than relievers are. They just pitch more innings. They give more to a team generally than a relief pitcher does. But there's still some interesting guys out there that the Orioles could go out and get, right? It's easier to get these kind of relief guys than it is the starting guys when you're a seller at the deadline. If I'm the Orioles, I'm also looking for relief pitchers who are in AAA or have even had a taste of the big leagues over the past couple of years and maybe have struggled a little bit and gone back down to AAA. I'm looking for something similar to Yennier Cano. Remember in the Jorge Lopez trade with the Twins back at the deadline in 2022, the Orioles sent Lopez away and they got 3 younger pitching prospects, including Cade Povich, but they also got Cano, who we didn't really think much of at the time, right? He was a reliever who was in AAA. He had pitched a little bit and debuted out of the Twins bullpen early in the season. It hadn't gone well. He was back in AAA. He had okay numbers with good stuff. We were like, what is this? Well, within a year, the Orioles turned him into an all-star reliever and the best setup man in all of baseball. I'm not going to expect them to go get the best setup man in all of baseball once again in one of these trades, but something like Cano, where you have a guy who has the skills. He's maybe gotten a little taste of the big leagues, but he hasn't quite put it together yet. He's in AAA and his team feels he's expendable because, he's already had his struggles with them. They're not going to use him in the bullpen to get him to the playoffs this year. They want a more established guy, and the Orioles think they can work with a guy and bank on him being good by 2026. So I came up with some names here as well. Let's start with Riley Martin, 27-year-old left-handed pitcher in the Chicago Cubs system. Now, 27 is fairly old. He's not really a prospect anymore. I mean, I guess he is, right? He was still on the Fangraphs list for the Cubs, but he was a 6th-round pick back in 2021 out of a small school in Quincy University. He is Rule 5 eligible, so the Orioles would want to have a spot for him on that 40-man roster, but he spent all of last year in AAA. He was, okay. He had good strikeout numbers, high walk numbers, high ERA. He came back to AAA this year, 39 2/3 innings, 2.95 ERA. Now, the walks are certainly still high, but he's got a 31% strikeout rate. Opponents are hitting just 147 against Martin in AAA this season. It's an absolutely devastating slider and an even better curveball from the left side. He just needs to rein in the walks. Like Eric Longenhagen's right up on Fangraphs is just, if he gets any more command, he'll be a really good left-handed reliever out of a big league bullpen. That's the Yennier Cano archetype. You could go get a guy like that. How about a guy I really, really love? How about San Francisco Giants 26-year-old right-hander Kai-Wei Tang? This guy has some stuff. Like, he has been really, really good for San Francisco this year. Now, this is a guy who has debuted already. He actually made the Giants opening day roster last year, pitched in 4 games, 11 innings out of the bullpen, went back down to AAA and has not returned since. He had some really rough numbers, had an 8.60 ERA in AAA last season. That has turned around. Tang at 26 years old in AAA this year, 52 1/3 innings, 3.78 ERA, 2.85 FIP. His walk rate has plummeted. It has gone down from like 13 to 8% in AAA. His strikeout rate, which was at 17% last year in AAA, is 38%. That is an absurd strikeout rate for any pitcher, even a reliever with big league stuff who's in AAA. It's a sinker and a slider. The slider is an absolutely wipeout pitch. He still has options. You could put him right in your big league bullpen. He'd be a guy who you could turn around. How about Ryan Fernandez of the Cardinals if they decide to be buyers? 27-year-old righty, is a 32% strikeout rate in 31 innings, 3.5 ERA in AAA this year. He was in the big leagues all of last year at a 3.51 ERA and 67 innings for the Cardinals as a middle reliever last season. But he just lost his command this year, got sent to AAA and hasn't come back. He still has 2 option years. If you can get him back to the Ryan Fernandez of 2024, you've got a super good middle reliever who can stick in your bullpen all year, and the Cardinals may be ready to give up on a guy at age 27. Also have a younger name in Jose Rodriguez. He's a 23-year-old righty who's in AAA with the Dodgers right now. Now, this is a guy where he does have a high ERA, so you're not going to love what you're seeing there from Rodriguez. It's at 6.34 in 38 innings this season, but he's also rocking a 37% strikeout rate to just an 11% walk rate. That is not really bad at all. He's got some tantalizing stuff from the right side. It's a bad fastball command, but it's a nasty slider, nasty changeup. That's something the Orioles can work with. Michael Mercado is another guy I've pinpointed. Like, he's been up and down in the Phillies bullpen this year. He does have a 6.15 ERA in AAA, but he's got a 123 stuff plus on his cutter. He's got one more option year past this year. He's got one like huge pitch that he can use that the Orioles can really lock in on. I mean, you see some of these guys, and yeah, they're older, but go back to go back to a couple of these guys, including Kai-Wei Tang. Like, yeah, he's 26 and he's, pitched already once in the big leagues, but like, look at his AAA Savant page. I mean, if you're watching the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, I mean, it's the high strikeout rates, it's the low walk rates, the high chase rates, the high whiff rates. He's getting whiffs in the zone. He's allowing only soft contact. Like, he's 26 in AAA, but he's got the whole package, the stuff. And he's broken out on the scene this year. And the Giants still haven't given him another chance. Maybe they go get a bullpen guy from the Orioles and they get this guy back who, if they trade Dominguez to the Giants, they could get Tang back and insert him directly into the bullpen on that day and have him, work out the issues and be ready to be a good reliever in 2026. And these are the kind of guys, the Yennier Cano types, that they could target. And at the end of the day, Mike Elias is going to look for the best deal he can get when it comes to the guys that he feels like, you probably got to trade, right? Dominguez, Soto, Morton, maybe O'Hearn and Eflin are in that mix. But, if it's close to the big leagues, guys, like I'm talking about, great. If not, if Elias gets prospects that are younger, it doesn't mean, they're going into a full rebuild or they're not trying to win in 2026. It just means maybe they got offered a better deal with better players, even if they're a little bit younger and a little bit further away from the big leagues. He's still going to try to maximize that value. And that's the big decision Elias has to make. If you say you have a bidding war for Seranthony Dominguez and you're down to your final two offers that are the best two. One of them includes, one pitcher who's going to be major league ready next year, but, he might be a reliever, might be a starter, has some command issues. You're not sure how much he'll help. Or the other offer has two 21-year-old pitchers who are in high A and double A. They won't be ready till at least 2027, but you see the ceiling is higher and they have better stuff and they could be both better pitchers, but you're trying to win next year. Which trade do you make? It's going to be really interesting decisions that Elias has to make. And he also has some arms in his own AAA that I think he wants to give a shot and that they could hit. Kate Stroud, Yarmil Geraldo, Grant Wolfram, Colin Selby, those types who are going to get a bigger chance down the stretch for the Orioles to try and win one of these jobs. But you can't just rely on those guys. And we saw how much starting pitching depth the Orioles had this year, and it crumbled, even with having, healthy Grayson, Bradish, Wells, Rogers, Povich, Young, McDermott, Weston, Albert Suarez. At minimum, you're signing one or two guys. Like, even with all those guys going into next year, you want more pitching depth than that, and that should be the bigger focus at this year's deadline. But I'm intrigued to see what the Orioles can do, what they can get as they trade away some of these rental type guys. But they're certainly going to be looking either way to continue to improve that pitching depth, especially among guys who can start, that are in that, AAA / big league mold. And maybe if they can't help them this year, they can at least help them next year. And it wasn't a trade, but they continue to do that on Wednesday, claiming an interesting arm. Right-hander Elvin Rodriguez off waivers from the Brewers. Tell you about him to finish off the show coming up next. So the newest Oriole is Elvin Rodriguez. Going to get you his scouting report before we get out of here. Orioles claimed him off waivers from the Brewers on Wednesday. The Brewers had DFA'd him last week. Orioles had 2 open spots on their 40-man roster, so they did not have to make a move there to get him on the 40-man. And he does have options. The Orioles immediately optioned Rodriguez to AAA Norfolk, where he will begin his time in the Orioles organization. Now, who is Elvin Rodriguez? 27-year-old right-handed pitcher who this offseason signed a split contract. It's a minor league / major league contract with the Milwaukee Brewers that was going to pay him about $1 million if he were in the big leagues, but he was back down in AAA and got DFA'd by the Brewers last week. Now, he made the Brewers opening day roster, made 6 appearances, 2 starts, 4 relief appearances, and his final one was on May 7th when he allowed 6 runs in 3 1/3 innings. Really, he had one good outing, 5 innings of 1-run ball with 7 Ks and 1 walk on April 14th against the Tigers. Otherwise, he wasn't great. And, with stats that looked like 18 2/3 innings and an 8.68 ERA at the big league level, the Brewers sent him back down to AAA. Now, he's been working mostly as a, essentially multi-inning reliever when he's been in AAA, a 4.25 ERA in 29 2/3 innings. But since he was last demoted to AAA on May 7th, 3.38 ERA in 20 2/3 innings, 22% strikeout rate, and a 7% walk rate. Now, it is a 5-pitch mix, at least in the majors, for Rodriguez this year. It's a 4-seam fastball at 94 miles an hour that has huge vertical movement, 19.3 inches on average of induced vertical break. That is that ability to not rise the ball, but have it drop less. So a hitter feels like it's rising. When it comes to him, it makes him swing and miss, it makes him pop the ball up, makes the ball play up in the zone really well. 19.3 inches of IVB on average. That is the 12th most of all Major League Baseball pitchers this year. That is an elite 4-seam fastball, even at just 94 miles an hour, which is like around league average or barely above, at least for a reliever. But the fastball was also getting crushed, probably because he was locating it in the middle of the zone a little too much. If he gets that thing up in the zone, it is dynamite. He also has a big curveball at 79 miles an hour. He's got a cutter at 88 that got smoked in the big leagues this year. And then a sweeper and a changeup with both got big swing and miss. But he didn't really throw them very much for the Brewers this season. But since he's gone back down to the minors, he's changed things up a little bit. He's thrown more 4-seam fastballs because it's so good. And he's thrown way more sweepers and changeups lately because they've just been more effective pitches while still throwing his curveball and basically dropping his cutter. That pitch was so bad in the majors, he's gotten rid of it, which was probably a good call. Now, lefties are still hitting him hard, but righties really do struggle against him. And he did have a little major league experience before this year. He pitched some for the Tigers in 2022 after making their opening day roster. He pitched a few times for the Rays in 2023, but then he was released by the Rays in July of 2023 and signed in Japan in the NPB with the Tokyo Swallows. He pitched for them through the 2024 season. As a reliever last year in Japan, he was incredible. 45 innings, a 1.80 ERA in Japan, was one of the best relief pitchers in that league. And the Brewers really liked the stuff and signed him to a deal to come back over to the States this season. Now, that 4-seam fastball sweeper combination should continue to make him good against righties. The changeup is there with the 4-seamer and the curveball. The Orioles can make that changeup a little bit better. And there is an ability for the O's to bring him back potentially for 2026. So if he gets a shot in the majors, which if the O's make enough trades, he probably will at some point down the stretch, especially if they give him a chance to start some games, which is possible. It's likely he's just a reliever long-term. The Brewers tried him as a starter, but he's just been so much better as a relief pitcher, both here and in Japan in his career. But it's possible that it could be a starter, but more likely he's a reliever. He shows off that 4-seam fastball with that big sweeper and turns into a good reliever. The Orioles can make that changeup better to help him get lefties out. It'd be pretty cheap to bring him back for 2026. I like this pickup. And again, for 27-year-old, Elvin Rodriguez, honestly, is kind of a guy who falls somewhat into the category of the pitchers I was just talking about that the Orioles should be targeting in trades. Now, maybe he's a little step below because he's shown enough big league time, went over to Japan and came back, and he's a little bit of a different boat. But he's in at least the similar ballpark of those kind of guys they should get. And I like that they went and got a guy in Rodriguez on waivers, had space for him. I'm fairly certain he'll pitch for the Orioles at some point down the stretch, especially after the deadline this year. We'll get a chance to see what he's like. Will the Orioles bring him back? Maybe he's a part of this bullpen next year. It's a total possibility. These are the kind of guys, right? Maybe higher ceiling guys than Rodriguez, the guys that aren't on waivers, that the Orioles should be trying to bring in to kind of rebuild the starting pitching depth and this bullpen for next year, which is going to look quite different, right? They're going to be without Dominguez and Soto and maybe Kittredge next year. And you never know what's going to happen with Aiken. He's going into his final year. And we know Cano has been very up and down this season. Cino Perez was already DFA'd earlier this year. Like, this bullpen's going to look a lot different before they get to Felix Bautista next season. They can start acquiring those type of arms now through the trades and through guys like Elvin Rodriguez, who there's certainly something here for him to potentially help the Orioles. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, we're doing a giveaway here on the Locked On Orioles podcast to celebrate crossing over 9,000 subscribers here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. We are giving away one of the old Orioles Hawaiian shirts. You can see it holding it up right now. If you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube. So this is how you enter to win the Orioles Hawaiian shirt. Step 1, you must be subscribed, or do it now. Subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Step 2, put in the comments section of either today's video, Wednesday's video, or the upcoming Friday episode. And in honor of the upcoming trade deadline, let me know what is your favorite trade in Orioles history. I've talked about it, my favorite trade as sellers, Eric Bedard for Adam Jones, Chris Tillman, George Sherrill. Favorite trade as buyers was certainly the Corbin Burns deal from last year. But let me know in the comments. Remember, number one, subscribe to the show on YouTube. Number two, leave a comment on today's video. What is your favorite Orioles trade of all time? Entries will close on Saturday. I'll do the drawing on Sunday, and either Monday or Tuesday of next week, I will announce the winner of the Orioles Hawaiian shirt. So make sure to enter into that one. And thank you all for helping me get beyond 9,000 subscribers. Now we're shooting for 10,000. It'll be even a bigger giveaway for that one. But I will be back tomorrow. We continue kind of, trade deadline week here on the show. It is the All-Star break. Looking to do some Orioles and Phillies talk tomorrow. The Philadelphia Phillies are a really good team. They need bullpen help. They need outfield help. What do the Orioles have to trade away? Relievers and outfielders. They made a trade last year. They could be a perfect fit again at this year's deadline. So we're going to talk Orioles, Phillies on tomorrow's episode and try and work out some trades that could come up between the two teams in a couple of weeks. But that's all coming up on tomorrow's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.